Well, good morning, and welcome to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. We are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio on Marcus Street in Corning. I'm so glad that you've joined us this morning. We have a lot to cover. We have a lot to catch up on, too. A couple of updates from stories we brought to you yesterday and late last week. Also, of course, the visit from the El Salvadorian president was an interesting, press conference. We're going to talk about that as well. First, we've got a comment from Mark. Well, good morning, Mark. I see Trump wants the FCC to punish 60 Minutes for its false reporting. Yes, even going as far as saying taking away their license. And this comes not just on the heels of the Kamala Harris 60 Minutes edited interview that's already in litigation. But this was in their 60 Minutes reporting on Russia and Ukraine over the weekend. We will get to that because I have quite a few media updates. So we'll talk about that. Mark also brings up, and J.D. Vance drops a football trophy and breaks it. Yes, Ohio State visited the White House Monday afternoon to be honored by J.D. Vance and President Trump. While Trump and Vance prepared to pose for a photo with the Buckeyes players and coaches, Vance attempted to pick up the championship trophy and couldn't quite handle it. The trophy's top half detached from the bottom half as the blocky pedestal that allows the trophy to stand on its own hit the ground. The grand top half narrowly avoided involvement in the major party foul as those around Vance, including running back Trayvon Henderson, helped keep it from falling. They could not attach it either. He was kind of forced holding it, holding just the top of the trophy. He went to X to say, I didn't want anyone after Ohio State to get the trophy, so I decided to break it. If you're not aware, Vance graduated from Ohio State. Trump said Vance was such a good student, he didn't stay there for 4 years. He got out in 2 years, number one in his class. How do you do that? Anyway, so that was a kind of a big story making the rounds later yesterday with Vance. I don't know if he really broke the trophy. It seems like it wasn't really attached, but nearly fumbling it, I guess you could say breaking it. We are going to talk about the media there that you bring up, Mark, in a little bit. A couple updates. First, a Maryland jury yesterday did find the illegal immigrant Victor Antonio Martinez Hernandez guilty of murdering Bel Air woman and mother Rachel Morin in August of 2023. Morin, a 37-year-old mother of 5, was jogging along the Ma and Pa Trail in Bel Air. That's when, while on her jog, Martinez Hernandez ambushed, strangled, and beat her to death. Prosecutors rested their case on Friday, and on Monday, the defense rested its case after less than 10 minutes before closing arguments were made. The family's attorney said this has been an emotionally grueling experience for Rachel's family, but they remain steadfast in their pursuit of justice. Now, the guilty verdict was found quite quickly. The Hartford County Sheriff Jeff Gawler said, the failure here again is the immigration system that allowed this person to enter our country illegally and remain in our country and commit crimes in Los Angeles and then here in Hartford County. Now, I'm not going to go through all the specifics. It's quite graphic. It's quite heartbreaking. But Rachel Morin's murderer has been found guilty in that case. Okay, also from Pennsylvania, a story we brought to you yesterday, which was the arson attack on Governor Shapiro. Well, the attacker suspect, Cody Balmer, admitted, quote, harboring hatred towards Shapiro. The man, who police say confessed to setting fire to the mansion of Governor Josh Shapiro and his family, was not a fan of Trump and a whack job, President Donald Trump said on Monday. Cody Balmer, 38, of Harrisburg, is currently receiving treatment at a hospital for a medical event not connected to his incident or his arrest. Balmer served in the Army Reserves from 2004 to 2012. He was a construction equipment repairer and had no deployments. Balmer has been charged with domestic terrorism, aggravated arson, criminal homicide, and other counts, according to criminal complaints unveiled Monday. While being interviewed by troopers, Balmer admitted to harboring hatred towards Governor Shapiro. He removed gasoline from a lawnmower and poured it into Heineken bottles he found at his residence. Now, Trump was asked during his meeting with El Salvador's president if he had learned of a possible motive. He said, "No, I haven't, but the attacker was not a fan of Trump, I understand. Just from what I've read and from what I've been told, the attacker basically wasn't a fan of anybody's. Probably just a whack job, and certainly a thing like that cannot be allowed to happen." House Speaker Mike Johnson called the attack on Shapiro inexcusable, saying such evil cannot be tolerated. Thankfully, they are unharmed. The perpetrator must be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Now, he was also, we learn, out on bail when he allegedly firebombed Shapiro's mansion. He made, I don't know if you saw the faces that he was making as he entered the courtroom. Quite evil looking. So 8 charges, including terrorism, aggravated arson, criminal homicide, and prowling at night. Probably one of the lesser charges, prowling at night. Now, the former mechanic, who said he is now jobless, penniless, and lives with his parents, was free after making bail for a 2023 simple assault charge. In that case, he was accused of stomping on his 10-year-old son's broken leg and battering his wife. Now, as he was entering the court, he stuck out his tongue and crossed his eyes. Judge Dale Klein promptly ordered him held without bond, to which he replied, "Thank you, ma'am." Really quite an odd, disturbing man. We will find out exactly the reason behind this, I'm sure, in the trial. But the New York Post editorial board said that this attack on Governor Shapiro is the latest in an epidemic of political violence that's been plaguing the nation for half of a decade. An epidemic driven, and this is important, by the left. Happily, Shapiro and his family were unharmed. Balmer is plainly deranged, but he declares himself a socialist in social media accounts, expressing a range of far-left beliefs. And the far left's normalization of violence goes back to at least 2020, when amid the pandemic and lockdowns, what started as protests in Minneapolis over the death of George Floyd quickly morphed into violent riots nationwide. Did National Democrats disavow the murderous thugs? On the contrary, they embraced and praised them. "We live in a state of emergency caused by Donald Trump. Anything goes," was the attitude. And that embrace has continued, sadly, to the present day. And we see it with the attack recently on Tesla dealerships, which we have an update on that in just a second as well. You see it with the intimidation of Jewish students on college campuses. This violence is encouraged. Witness the terror attacks against pro-life groups and the attempted assassination of Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh around the court overturning Roe v. Wade. Attacks echoing violent rhetoric from Senator Chuck Schumer about Kavanaugh and fellow Justice Neil Gorsuch. Witness a widespread effort to minimize and mock the near assassination of Donald Trump on the campaign trail. Witness the love lefty Democrats have, Witness the love lefty Dems from AOC to ex-Representative Jamal Bowman to President Joe Biden display for the violent, Jew-hating, neo-brown shirts spewing hate across college campuses in support of Hamas and its October 7th butcheries. Witness the anti-Tesla terrorism that's ranged from Molotov bombings to street vandalism because Democrats don't like Elon Musk. And that, just like the anti-Semitism on college campuses, encouraged by the quote-unquote grown-ups in the room. And you have people like Jasmine Crockett using language, Representative Jasmine Crockett using language that I don't see how you could look at it any other way, but encouraging violence on people they dislike. And then you have people like Luigi Mangione, who just yesterday, or well, technically we brought it to you yesterday, but on Sunday's shows, being praised by the media. The one former New York Times, Washington Post reporter, Taylor Lorenz, calling him a morally good man after his alleged assassination of United Health CEO Brian Thompson. And you see people sending him money for his defense. You see these young women on the street praising him with shirts almost making, not just young women, there's that kind of fan club that he has, but there's also men as well, almost putting him into sainthood. The left and even major shows like Saturday Night Live, almost you see the audience supporting this Luigi Mangione. The left typically uses the word justice to conceal the simple need for violence that animates a large section of its base. Justice has nothing to do with it, as normal Americans understand. The question is, can Democrats understand it? That was from the New York Post editorial board. And tying into that, a lipstick-wearing suspect has been charged in the Tesla and GOP office arson attacks in New Mexico. That's according to Pam Bondi. And they will not be offering him a plea deal. Jamison Wagner was arrested over the weekend and has been charged with 2 counts of malicious damage or destruction of property by fire or explosives for allegedly carrying out the attacks. The 40-year-old Albuquerque resident, a member of LGBT group, well, I'm not going to list the name here, faces up to 40 years in prison if convicted of both crimes. Bondi said these people thought they could get away with it. This is our 5th major arrest on Tesla. I've directed my prosecutors not to make any offers. He is going away, if convicted, for 40 years. Investigators linked Wagner to both arsons through surveillance footage and substantial crime scene evidence, according to the Justice Department. The accused arsonist will remain in custody pending a detention hearing, which has not been set. He allegedly used a glass container containing an improvised napalm material to set 2 Teslas ablaze at the electric car company's Albuquerque showroom during the early morning hours of February the 9th. He then went on to spray paint phrases like Die Elon, Tesla Nazi Inc., and Die Tesla Nazi, as well as swastika symbols, according to authorities. Wagner then targeted the New Mexico Republican Party headquarters the following month. The attack, which bore several similarities to the Tesla dealership arson, significantly damaged the front door and entryway to the building, spray painting such things as ICE equals KKK. So again, Pam Bondi saying there will be no plea deal. They're going for up to 40 years if found and convicted. If found guilty and convicted, excuse me. All right, we're running a little bit late. It's not going to be all violent attacks and all horrendous stories. We've got a couple updates for you here when we come back from stories we brought to you yesterday. We've got some waves coming in, got some comments coming in. Keep them coming in. A lot to cover this morning. What did you think about it's not really called, what is that called, a press briefing? When you had the El Salvador president in with Trump and Rubio was there and Vance. It was really interesting. Boy, Trump, speaking of the media, as Mark had brought up earlier about 60 Minutes, there's also an update on NPR and PBS, but Trump did not pull any punches when it came to CNN during that press meeting by any means. We're going to talk about that as well. So a lot of updates. Stay with us. Oh, and an update. Yesterday we had a viewer ask about the AP, the Associated Press. Were they being allowed into these events like the judge ordered? They are complaining now that they are not. We're going to talk about that as well. So stay with us. Just getting started on this Tuesday morning edition. If you're on spring break and you're watching us during your spring break, well, we sure do appreciate it. There are perhaps more exciting ways to spend spring break, but I can't think of any. So thank you for joining us. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking. Foggy morning, isn't it? Look at that. Eerie. Thank you to Boss Security for bringing us the Frankly Speaking Roof Cam. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. We are back broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. Couple of updates before we get to the AP. We have a lot of media updates. We also have, obviously, college campuses. If you have not saw we'll get to it in a moment. But Harvard making what could be a very costly decision on whether or not they'll crack down on anti-Semitism. We'll get to that in just a moment. First, yesterday we brought to you the story of Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Now, some said her visit to the Oval Office has cost her her chance at the nomination for presidency from the Democratic Party. She was a rising star. It was just last week that we had article after article saying that we really have something here. She's making moves. She's changing her opinion on some things to be more acceptable to middle America, if you will. she's a fast rising star. Well, must be some other fast rising star didn't like that. And the coverage changed, and then it really changed when it came to her visiting the White House. And then you had CNN saying, well, that doesn't look like the face of the resistance. And then you had perhaps, well, I don't know, a very, very embarrassing moment in political history, which was her covering her face rather than be seen in the president's office. Some comparing her to a child, hiding her face behind her folders. Yes, that is the photo that we were talking about yesterday. Some say that is the end. That picture right there is the end of her presidential run. Your thoughts on that? But they asked her what she was trying to do there, what that was all about. She said, Whitmer said, "You asked me what was going on in my mind at that moment. It was, I don't want my picture taken. That's all it was. I kind of wish I hadn't put my folder up in front of my face, but whatever. We all have our moments." Now, that's one way to write it off. As I said, she was mocked even by her own party. Even, as I said, some considering it the end of her political career, not just because of the folder and the hiding behind the folders, but also because Trump praised her at that meeting, and then with the left coming out and saying she's not a part of the resistance, and you have to play to that far left base if you want to get the nomination for 2028. On Saturday, the New York Times published a photo of Whitmer trying to conceal her presence, similar to a child playing, if I can't see you, you can't see me. Whitmer said, "It was not where I wanted to be or planned to be or would have liked to have been. I disagree with a lot of stuff that was said and the actions that were taken, but I stayed in the room because I needed to make the case for Michigan, and that's my job." All right, so we all have our days, but that there must be somebody behind the scenes that does not want her. Somebody that's a star themselves, or someone that maybe a power broker, like in the past it would have been maybe Hillary Clinton thinking about running. I don't think Kamala Harris has the push to have that kind of power, because I don't think too many people in her party want her to run again. But there's somebody behind the scenes, because the New York Times in the past would not have published that photo, which was only could be seen as a negative for a Democrat. So there's somebody that doesn't want her to be the quote-unquote face of the party, or the face of 2028. Now, it could be something as simple as someone in the New York Times. Remember, they were all but endorsed AOC to at least run for Senate against Chuck Schumer, get a leadership position, maybe even president. So maybe it's just someone behind the scenes that's just a big supporter of an AOC or Gavin Newsom that now wants to bring down Governor Whitmer. But anyway. All right, so I mentioned the AP. We're going to talk about that. I don't want to run too late because we do have a break coming up. Keep your comments, keep your waves coming in. Your thoughts on, we've covered a lot already this morning. It's only 20 minutes after 6. We are going to talk about Harvard, and what happened here is Harvard said yesterday, you know what, we're not going to comply with the White House's demands to protect our Jewish students, to end this anti-Semitism on college campuses. And it looks as if the process has begun to withhold their federal funding, which is a lot of money. We'll see how they respond to that. We'll talk about that. And, of course, El Salvador president and his visit. A couple other things about the Trump administration. A few things here about the New York State budget. Yesterday, we had that reporter who claimed it would be done this week. Now we have reports coming out that says that the budget probably won't be done till May at the earliest. By the way, I forgot it's tax day. Did you get your taxes done? Do you have us on in the background as you're trying to fill out your last bit of paperwork and head to the post office? Yesterday, our poll at WYDCTV.com, I got quite a reaction, and I brought it to you. They have a question of the day. And yesterday's question of the day was, have you filed your taxes? Well, 58.3% of you said, yes, I already filed my taxes. 41.7% said, no, I have not. So to you, 41.7%, stop taking polls and get your taxes done. Well, if you haven't finished them, we joke. If you haven't finished them, good luck. I know it's a stressful time of year. All right, let's take that break. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. We are back broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. We have so many comments coming in to the viewer who sent in the Holy Week proclamation from President Trump. Thank you. I did see that. We're going to get to that just a little bit later on when we talk about the Trump administration general. But what a proclamation. Also, Franklin Graham weighed in on it. We'll talk about that a little bit later on as well, but I do appreciate your comments too. Overall, thank you. Comment from a viewer. Good morning, Frank. Well, good morning. I'm not sure why President Trump praised her, meaning Gretchen Whitmer, and I question it when I saw that for myself. But have you ever known these people to miss a photo op? Right. Such a lame excuse. She's trying to play both sides and didn't want to be recognized. Yes, she wanted things for Michigan, but she didn't want the pushback. Why, if you want my humble opinion, why Trump praised her, it was for the exact reaction she is now getting. It is starting her out on her presidential run hobbled. By praising her, he knows, I don't think he really thinks she's doing a great job, but he knows that's going to be the clips that her opponents play. And you can say, well, does he support the other one? No, but you're starting someone off on a really bad foot if you're running for the Democrat nomination. You've got her photo op in the Oval Office. Trump is praising her. And he signs executive orders while she's in the room that clearly her and Democrats do not support. So it was more of an attack on Whitmer, kind of killing someone with kindness, is my opinion on that. And it's, CNN saying, this does not look like the face of the resistance, meaning Governor Whitmer. You have others saying it's the end of her political career. So that's why I believe he praised her. Comments from a different viewer. And I'm not sure. And if I'm changing the name, I apologize if you're trying to make a joke. Talking about Bezos, but you called him Bozo. I'm not sure if that was just autocorrect. But Musk rescues astronauts, crickets. Bezos sent celebrities into space, for 11 minutes? And it'll be news for a week. It's already, listen, was it interesting? Sure. But you're right. No one in the media wanted to give Musk credit. Well, it's why those astronauts had to stay in space for so long, because Biden didn't want to be seen working with Musk before the election in saving those astronauts. So just like Biden didn't want to be seen, the media doesn't want to be seen supporting Musk and what he did. So perfect way of putting it, crickets. There was nothing about it in the news. Now we have heard nonstop coverage of these celebrities being sent to space for, I think it was like 11 minutes, 12 minutes, something like that. So thank you. Very good comment. And yes, again, to the person sending about Holy Week, I will get to that a little bit later on. So the AP, we had someone ask this question yesterday on the program. The Associated Press complained Monday that the White House did not allow its photographer and reporter to attend an Oval Office meeting with President Trump and El Salvador's leader, Bukele, despite a court order to reinstate its access. Last week, a Trump-appointed judge ordered the White House to restore access to the wire service that had been blocked because they refused to say Gulf of America, which to me, even though I know it was a Trump-appointed judge, seems like an overreach to me. Again, why is the AP, listen, I'm a news outlet here. Do I have a right to go to any Oval Office meeting that the president has? No, I'm not saying that I have the reach that the Associated Press does, but I don't understand how you can force a White House to allow somebody to cover it unless you open up a can of worms and it's any media outlet. The AP told the New York Post, our journalists were blocked from the Oval Office today. We expect the White House to restore AP's participation in the pool as of today, as provided in the injunction order. The lower court order had been paused for 5 days until Monday to allow time for an appeal to be filed. Trump's team is appealing the ruling to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit and is slated to face a hearing on Thursday. D.C. U.S. District Judge Trevor McFadden, whom Trump appointed back in 2017, declined to delay his order from taking effect Tuesday, despite a request from the Trump administration to give more time for an appeal. So the AP claims it was blocked from that Oval Office meeting. I'm not going to go through the whole lineup of how you get into the White House and the Oval Office, but AP still has not garnered access to the rotating wire slot in the White House pool since the ban. Last Tuesday, McFadden determined that the White House doesn't have to invite the AP to every event, but needs to give it similar access that it provides to other outlets. I just find that so strange. But there we go. There's your update from a question that someone asked us on yesterday's program. Speaking of the media, the White House is ready to plan for Congress to axe taxpayer funding for NPR and PBS. This has long been a major topic for conservatives because when you look at NPR and you look at PBS, they're receiving a lot of taxpayer funding, and it's unnecessary if you look at the money that they're making from viewers like you and from corporate donations. But also their extreme bias. No one, I don't even think an avowed Democrat could deny that there is a bias at NPR and PBS. It's almost become a joke through the years. It's almost become the kind of stereotype of public radio and public television about their far left slant. The Trump administration took its first step yesterday towards ending federal funding of National Public Radio and public broadcasting services, informing key members of Congress that it is asking for them to eliminate, quote, all such spending while also codifying foreign aid cuts identified by Elon Musk's Doge. The major funding changes are contained in a long-awaited rescissions plan, obtained and first reported by the New York Post, that pitches a clawback of $1.1 billion appropriated for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and $8.3 billion from U.S. aid. Now, what's interesting when it comes to public television, public radio, what they'll always say, first they'll try to tell you that it's going to be the end of Big Bird and, you know, all the beloved kids programs. But then they'll start to say it's going to be the destruction of the small stations that carry their broadcasting, the local public broadcasting. The problem with that is if you ever want to see a state-of-the-art studio, state-of-the-art broadcasting facility, go to a PBS or an NPR. Because of this funding, they have the best equipment. This is coming from someone who worked in media in the private sector, obviously here and in radio, where you don't get new equipment every year, where you make do with what you have. That's the nature of private business. When it comes to this public funding from PBS and NPR, they could have the best and the brightest of everything. And that was paid for by you. And you might tune into PBS, you might tune in NPR and be offended how far left they are. But yet your money, your tax dollars, still going to that broadcast. A memo drafted by the White House Budget Director Russ Vought and requested by GOP congressional leaders accuses CPB of a lengthy history of anti-conservative bias. Now, CPB is Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and cites waste, fraud, and abuse at USAID. Formal transmissions of the plan to lawmakers will start a 45-day clock for the Republican-held House and Senate to either adopt or reject the blueprint, which the White House believes will pass, unlike President Trump's 2018 rescission plan, which failed by one vote in the Senate. Quote, since day one, the Trump administration has targeted waste, fraud, and abuse in federal spending through executive action, Doge review, and other efforts by departments and agencies. Congress has expressed strong interest in supporting those efforts and requested the administration transmit rescissions to the Hill for swift approval. OMB recommends the administration respond with two proposals to cut $9.3 billion. The first includes a rescission of $8.3 billion in wasteful foreign aid spending out of $22 billion that does not expire in fiscal year 2025. The second is a separate rescission of all federal funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which funds the politically biased public radio and public television system. The White House memo notes that NPR CEO Catherine Maurer once called Trump a fascist and a deranged racist, statements that Maurer told Congress last month she now regrets making, and cites two recent PBS programs featuring transgender characters. Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana, you ever watch his videos at those hearings? He's fun to watch. He applauded the plan, tweeting, NPR and PBS have a right to publish their biased coverage, but they don't have a right to spend taxpayer money on it. It's time to defund the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. NPR and PBS both have diverse revenue streams, including major foundation grants, advertising, and voluntary viewer and listener donations mean that neither is likely to cease operations if they lose federal funding. Trump himself called for NPR and PBS to be defunded last month, though it was unclear at the time how that could be accomplished. So we'll be, and they go through a list of some of these, like $3 million for Iraqi Sesame Street, $500,000 for electric buses in Rwanda. This was USAID, and just going through the waste that they've discovered. But a lot of conservatives have been calling for this for a long time, the defunding, if you will, of NPR and PBS because of that bias. Some have even likened it to propaganda against Republicans. So this is the step in the right direction. Will it happen? That's the big question. Will it finally come to fruition? Time will tell, but it seems like there is an appetite for it in Washington, which is a good thing. Yes, they will push the idea that it's the end of Big Bird. They'll push the idea that it's disastrous for children. That is just not the case. They have plenty of revenue coming in. This was just kind of mad money, if you will, a little extra money to spend on the newest equipment, the best technology. But we got to take a short break. We are moving fast this morning. A couple other media updates, college updates. We are going to talk about, of course, that meeting with the president of El Salvador. So please keep those comments and those waves coming in, and we will be back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. You can kind of see Marcus Tree. Thank you to Boss Security for bringing us the Frankly Speaking Roof Cam. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. We are back, broadcasting live and proudly from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. Comment from a viewer: the AP doesn't need access to the Oval Office since they make up stories anyway, irregardless of what actually is said or done. Thank you very much for that comment. Also on the media front, CBS could lose its license after a 60 Minutes segment on Ukraine and Greenland. Almost every week, this is the president tweeting out, almost every week 60 Minutes mentions the name Trump in a derogatory and defamatory way. But this weekend's broadcast tops them all. They did not one, but two major stories on Trump, one having to do with Ukraine, which I say is a war that would never have happened if the 2020 election had not been rigged. In other words, if I were president, and the other story was having to do with Greenland, casting our country, as led by me, falsely, inaccurately, and fraudulently. So this comes after the already $20 billion lawsuit against them because of their editing of that Harris interview during the campaign. So yes, Trump threatening CBS with substantial punishment, even maybe losing their license over the latest 60 Minutes broadcast. What I think this does, at a time when Republicans have always complained about the bias in the media, and that's even with presidents complain about it, but nothing was really done. This is an instance where at least he's pushing back. Whatever you think about losing the license or not allowing the AP into the Oval Office, whatever you think about those issues, it is finally saying, if you're going, just like with NPR and PBS, if you're going to be this biased, we don't have to support you. Speaking of the media, on a completely different, discussion. I saw this morning. This is the first time I had heard of this, and this is, I think, going to be fascinating. I was not even prepared for it. I have it later on in my stack of paperwork to talk about. But since we are talking about the media, it's probably only right, and I know that you'll be interested in it. On January 20th, this is coming from the Hollywood Reporter, so take it with a grain of salt. On January 20th, the day of President Donald Trump's inauguration, Fox News Media placed 4 people in complete isolation in upstate New York with no contact to the outside world. No phones, internet, television, or social media. How they got 4 people to agree to that, it must have been a pretty good paying job. 90 days later, those 4 people will come out of their cocoon. But before learning about what happened in the world over the past 3 months, they have to get through Greg Gutfeld, it says here. Gutfeld will host a game show called What Did I Miss for the Fox Nation streaming service, with the contestants having to guess things that actually happened over the last 90 days while avoiding scenarios invented by the production team. The show will see Gutfeld presenting dozens of scenarios featuring real headlines and fake ones. with the contestants having to sort through them to figure out what really happened and what didn't. The grand prize, $50,000. The first episode of the game show will debut on Fox Nation on May the 12th, with episodes 2 and 3 releasing on the 13th and 14th, respectively. The premise of the show is sure to elicit curiosity, given the nonstop barrage of news. You know what's going to be interesting when you watch this? There's going to be so many things that you forget happened. I mean, me too. I'm saying me too. That after 90 days, he's going to put a headline on and you're going to say, did that happen? I can't remember that happening. Gutfeld has become one of Fox News' biggest stars, as you know. Fox News president Lauren Peterson said, truth can be stranger than fiction, and who better to help isolated Americans catch up on the headlines they missed during an unprecedented news cycle than Greg Gutfeld. We are excited for Fox Nation subscribers to have exclusive access to America's most watched late-night host's game show debut, as he informs contestants about what really happened while they were completely off the grid and isolated to the outside world. The premise of this, I hope they do some backstory. Well, Gutfeld added, for these 4 contestants to learn what really happened while they were living in isolation, they'll have to get through me first. Lucky them. I think it'd be just fascinating to see how, like a little documentary running up into the game show of how they were in this isolation and not knowing anything about Trump for that long. Just very interesting. Sorry, that was kind of a side note. Not what I intended to bring out, but it fit as we talked about media. So yesterday, the Trump administration was told in no uncertain terms by Harvard that they refused his demands on curtailing anti-Semitism. This seems like you wouldn't necessarily want to be on this side of things. Now, that's not how they worded it, but they are essentially saying, no, we are willing to lose government funding to stand with anti-Semitism. Harvard University said it will not comply with demands issued by the Trump administration aimed at curtailing anti-Semitism on campus. No government, regardless of which power is in party, should dictate what private universities can teach, whom they can admit and hire, and which areas of study and inquiry they can pursue, said the Ivy League school president, Alan Garber. The Trump administration quickly shot back, announcing a freeze on $2.2 billion in multi-year grants and $60 million in multi-year contracts mere hours later. Now, keep in mind, we've talked about their endowment in the past. They have plenty of money in their endowment. What is your thoughts on this? So this is another example. Like we talked about Trump going after the bias in the media. Now we have Trump saying enough with this anti-Semitism on college campuses, enough with the intimidation of Jewish students, not protecting your Jewish students. So if you want to do that, you have a right. We're going to talk about an opinion piece that says just that. If you want to support this anti-Semitism on your college campuses, you have a right to do that, but you don't have a right to receive taxpayers' dollars. Harvard's statement reinforces, this is President Trump's joint task force to combat anti-Semitism. Harvard's statement today reinforces the troubling entitlement mindset that is endemic in our nation's most prestigious universities and colleges. That federal investment does not come with the responsibility to uphold civil rights laws. The disruption of learning that has plagued campuses in recent years is unacceptable. The harassment of Jewish students is intolerable. It's time for elite universities to take the problem seriously and commit to meaningful change if they wish to continue receiving taxpayer support. So Harvard deciding, nope, we are going to stand with the anti-Semitic protesters. We know what was asked of them, of Harvard, but they said no. And Trump said, okay, no longer. You will lose $2 billion, $2.2 billion in multi-year grants and $60 million in multi-year contracts. And he announced that mere hours after they said, no, we're not going to meet your demands. Now we know at Columbia, they said, yeah, we're going to meet your demands. Sure. And then when they got behind closed doors, quite the opposite. They said to their faculty who was worried, no, don't worry. We're going to make this all work. We're not going to change anything. This was just to dupe Trump. We're going to show him the art of the deal. Well, that didn't go well. So we have a little bit more on this. I know we've got to talk about the El Salvador president, and we're almost done with hour number 1. But stay with us. Keep those comments, keep those waves coming in, and we'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam, brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. We are back broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio on Market Street in Corning. So we were talking, well, first a comment from Mark. He writes in, I didn't see Biden meeting with all these presidents of other countries, and if he did, he must have done it behind closed doors. I like the open government we have now. Yes, the transparency is almost too much, and I joke when I say that. But watching that yesterday was, I thought, really remarkable and an inside look, and we're seeing such an inside look. Even over the weekend when Trump went to the UFC fights and on the way home late at night, still giving and answering reporters' questions on Air Force One. I don't think, and this is not hyperbole, I don't think there's ever been this much transparency from a president, this much taking of questions. We had that report yesterday that, Trump took more Oval Office questions. Was it Oval Office questions? I think it was. Before even yesterday's meeting, this term, than Biden had his whole 4 years at this point. But the Trump administration did announce, I want to go back to this for just a moment, the $2.2 billion for Harvard, the freeze for Harvard, after they rejected his request for policy changes. In response to the funding freeze, the university referred CNN to its earlier statement that it would not comply with the administration's demands, specifically focusing on the following. Quote, for the government to retreat from these partnerships now risks not only the health and well-being of millions of individuals, but also the economic security of our nation and vitality of our nation. Harvard President Alan Garber said, we have informed the administration through our legal counsel that we will not accept their proposed agreement. The university will not surrender its independence or its constitutional rights. Now, what I think is interesting about this, when you talk about constitutional rights, absolutely, they have a right to allow these anti-Semitic protests. They do. But that comes with consequences. It's just like you can't go into your workplace and scream something disgusting and keep your job. You're going to get fired. You have a right to say what you said, but you're going to get fired. Or there's other examples of it when it's the students that are here on visas and they're pushing pro-terrorist rhetoric, then that visa isn't a right. It's a privilege. So it's taken away. In this case, yes, you can act. As a matter of fact, it's a New York Post editorial board. Harvard may be free to target Jews, but not on the taxpayer dime. That's what it boils down to. We're going to get to that in a second. But again, this is coming from the Trump administration. President Trump is working to make higher education great again by ending unchecked anti-Semitism and ensuring federal taxpayer dollars do not fund Harvard's support of dangerous racial discrimination or racially motivated violence. Harvard or any institution that wishes to violate Title VI is, by law, not eligible for federal funding. Now, just to give you an update, Harvard's endowment was $53.2 billion in 2024. So if this is actually going to lead to some type of safety crisis, like the Harvard president tried to suggest, some type of health issues with people, research issues, why don't they dip into their $53.2 billion? So aren't really at that point, aren't they to blame if any of those things come to fruition that they tried to use as a scare tactic to make you nervous that research is going to go away? That means health and safety of Americans are at stake. Well, then you have $53.2 billion in the bank. I think it might be time for you to step up. Otherwise, it's your fault. If you want to continue to push this anti-Semitic rhetoric, that's fine. You're going to do so. But you're not going to get our money, the taxpayers' dollars. Use some of your own if it's going to be the end of the world. Harvard Law School professor Nicholas Bowie said, what the President of the United States is demanding of universities is nothing short of authoritarian. He is violating the First Amendment rights of universities and faculty by demanding that if universities want to keep this money, they have to suppress our speech and change what we teach and how we study. When we come back, I'm going to tell you what the Post editorial board has really to say in response to him, almost in a way, that professor, because, again, they do have a right to do this, but they don't have a right to federal funding. So we'll talk about it when we come back. Keep those comments, keep those waves coming in. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on Big Fox. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam, brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. We are back, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. So the New York Post editorial board, just to kind of wrap up this discussion on Harvard, said Harvard University is thumbing its nose at Team Trump and refusing to take steps to stamp out Jew hatred and discrimination on its campus. Seems like a weird position to take, but they understand, meaning the powers that be, the administration, understand that their faculty will boycott. They'll lose some of their far-left students. That's what it's all about. Fine. Then let them say goodbye to federal dollars, possibly as much as $9 billion a year's worth, and start spending its own money instead. The school, which in 2023 also saw the Supreme Court slap down its discriminatory admissions policies, huffs that it won't let government, quote, dictate what private universities can teach, whom they can admit and hire, and which areas of study and inquiry they can pursue. In truth, Trumpies essentially just want Harvard to comply with civil rights laws and the top court's 2023 ruling. But if the anti-Semites and racists that hold sway over the Ivy League school refuse to reform, taxpayers have no obligation to keep up the funding. Indeed, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act effectively bans federal funds for schools that discriminate. In fact, Harvard is a hotbed of leftism, with overwhelmingly left-leaning faculty and staff and a DEI culture that regards Jews, Israel, America, and the West as the oppressors. That does neither students nor the nation much good. Worse, the school employs blatant double standards. It would never, for example, permit the kind of post-October 7th hostility shown to Jews on campus if it were targeted at, say, blacks instead. Harvard may have a legal right to operate as a leftist bastion hostile to Jews, America, and the West, but U.S. taxpayers don't have to pay for it. The Trumpies, I don't know why the New York Post board always calls them that, but the Trumpies should shut down Harvard's federal spigot ASAP. Let the school tap its $500 billion plus endowment and see its reserves shrink, along with donations from alums who now see what they're actually supporting and what their money goes to when they support them. The sooner these bigots run out of money, the better off everyone else will be. So if they want to continue this anti-Semitism on college campus, allow it to flourish, and want to keep their far-left faculty happy who are not just they're participating in the anti-Semitic protests, not just supporting it. They're encouraging it. If they want that, that's fine, but you're going to have to tap into your endowment. So when you have the crocodile tears saying when the money dries up, it's going to hurt people because we won't be researching health initiatives and things like that, well, then you will have to tap into your endowment. Otherwise, you'll be the ones that are seeing this research go away that is supposedly helping the American people. Also, when we come back, one other quick issue, kind of in vein with this and in line with this maybe, and then we'll be talking about the El Salvador president. We do have a couple of updates on the New York State budget, though the updates aren't anything too groundbreaking. Then we've got some stories about the Trump administration, Democrats as well. Lately, it seems like on the program we've been telling you about some potential presidential candidates. We talked about Gretchen Whitmer already this morning, but a lot yesterday and later or at the end of last week. So we could talk a little bit about that. There's a really fascinating, like in-depth, I guess you would call it, look into Nancy Pelosi not willing to give up her leadership position in a sense, and what that is doing to the Democrat Party. We will, hopefully, I'll try to definitely make room for that. So keep the comments coming in. Keep the waves coming in. It's hard to believe hour number 1 is in the books on this tax day edition of Frankly Speaking. I hope you got your taxes done. If not, good luck. And we'll be back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, hour number 2, on its way. Well, it's hour number 2 of Frankly Speaking. Broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. Thank you so much for joining us, as always, on this tax day edition of Frankly Speaking. One last thing, as we were wrapping up the last hour, we were discussing Harvard losing the federal money because they will not protect their Jewish students. They will not discourage this anti-Semitism. Also at Colombia, ICE agents snatched up another anti-Israel Colombia protester, Mohsen Madawi. He was at his U.S. citizenship appointment. This was in Vermont. Palestinian student Mohsen Madawi, who hails from the West Bank, was detained at a U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services office in Burlington after spending 10 years in the U.S. and obtaining his green card. It now appears, however, that the Trump administration is seeking to cut Madawi's time short in the U.S. after he helped lead anti-Israel protests on Columbia's Morningside Heights campus until last spring. Video footage posted to X on Monday appeared to show Madawi being escorted with his hands shackled in front of him and surrounded by federal agents who placed him into an unmarked vehicle. Madawi said, "It's kind of a death sentence because my people are being killed unjustly in an indiscriminate way." Madawi was unlawfully detained today for no reason other than his Palestinian identity, said his attorney. He came to this country hoping to be free to speak out about the atrocities he had witnessed, only to be punished for such speech. Now, Colombia has declined to comment. They're in an interesting place because they don't want to lose their funding. Harvard, I guess they feel that with their, they won't dip into their endowment, but they must feel safe. On the other hand, Colombia is trying or attempting to look as if they're meeting Trump's demands. Madawi, who was friends with detained anti-Israel Colombia protester Mohammed Khalil, anticipated becoming a target of the Trump administration's mass deportation efforts and went into hiding, asking the university for help finding shelter. Then why is he at his U.S. citizenship appointment? That almost looks as if he was looking to be charged, because if you're hiding, I would guess that's not the place you hide. He was notified that they had moved his citizenship interview, which he expected would take place in January, December, and he became concerned it was part of a setup. Madawi was nabbed as he showed up to the appointment this week. The FBI also visited him late last year, but didn't take any actions against him. "This is the outcome," Madawi said. "I will be neither living or imprisoned or killed. I will either be living or imprisoned or killed by the apartheid system." Anyway, so that's just an update from the universities. Let's talk about arguably the biggest issue of the day, and that is the El Salvador president. Yesterday at that meeting in the Oval Office, what a great line that he had when it came to bringing that person back. Let's take a step back. El Salvador President Bukele claimed Monday that he has no ability to send an alleged MS-13 gang member from Maryland deported to the Central American country back to the U.S., despite the Supreme Court ruling directing the Trump administration to take, quote, steps to facilitate his return. Now, Pam Bondi was saying, well, we can send a plane, but that's not doing anything. We can't take someone's citizen, an El Salvadorian citizen, and take them from their country and bring them here. And what Bukele said, and I thought it was a great response to the reporters, saying, "Hope you are not suggesting that I smuggled terrorists into the United States. Of course, I'm not going to do it. That question is preposterous. I don't have the power to return him to the United States." And I thought that was a good line, really turning it back on the reporters, saying, I hope you're not suggesting that I smuggled terrorists into the United States, suggesting then because he is alleged member of the MS-13 on the terrorist list. So what he's saying is not inaccurate. Kilmar Abrego Garcia was removed last month to the notoriously brutal and overcrowded terrorism confinement center, alongside about 260 suspected gang members under the 18th Century Alien Enemies Act. In court documents, the Trump administration has alleged that Garcia is confirmed to be a ranking member of the MS-13 gang by a proven and reliable source. "He was illegally in our country," said Pam Bondi, telling reporters. "That's up to El Salvador if they want to return him. That's not up to us. The Supreme Court ruled that if El Salvador wanted to return him, we would facilitate it, meaning provide a plane." Bondi cited 2 immigration court decisions as evidence of Garcia's tie to MS-13. The first ruling on April 24, 2019, denied him bond in part because, quote, "the evidence shows that he is a verified member of MS-13. That December, a Board of Immigration Appeals ruling upheld the denial of bond, but passed no judgment on the claim that Garcia was a member of MS-13. Secretary of State Marco Rubio argued yesterday that the foreign policy of the United States is conducted by the President of the United States, not by a court. And I like that they're taking that position because we've had numerous examples of, and unfortunately I have examples later on in the program if we can get to them, of these kind of what are being called activist judges stopping the president's agenda. So again, Marco Rubio taking a strong stance on this. And the media is kind of hating this with Rubio because Rubio they thought would be more of a rhino member of the Trump administration, and that has not been the case, saying the foreign policy of the United States is conducted by the President of the United States, not by the court. I don't understand what the confusion is. This individual is a citizen of El Salvador. He was illegally in the United States and returned to his country. That's where you deport people, back to their country of origin. A Maryland federal judge has set an April 7th deadline for Garcia's return to U.S. soil. In an order handed down on April 10th, the High Court directed the administration to facilitate Garcia's release from custody in El Salvador and to ensure that his case is handled as it would have been had he not been improperly sent to El Salvador, though the deadline was no longer in effect. The Supreme Court also ruled that the lower court must show deference owed to the executive branch in the conduct of foreign affairs. Yeah, that's something that is purposely missed, especially by the reporters and their questions. Why, in any other administration, if it were a Democrat administration, they'd be saying, why do the courts have this much power? This is foreign policy. This is up to President Trump, not to some judge. The White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy, Stephen Miller, chided that it was, quote, very arrogant, even for American media, to suggest that Trump would even tell El Salvador how to handle their own citizens. Trump himself indicated he would be interested in expanding the deportation efforts to El Salvador. In an initial March 31st filing, the Trump administration stated that Garcia's removal was due to an administrative error and a clerical error since the October 19th order was still in effect. Miller denied that claim Monday, stating that the error rested with the Justice Department lawyer who submitted the filing and was later removed from the case by Bondi. That's a big fact that all of you, most of you, have gotten wrong, Miller told reporters. No one was mistakenly sent anywhere. The only mistake that was made is a Justice Department lawyer put an incorrect line in a legal filing and has since been relieved. Garcia is an illegal alien. He was deported to El Salvador. So again, I thought that was a great line. Bukele, El Salvador President Bukele saying, I hope you are not suggesting that I smuggle terrorists into the United States. Of course, I'm not going to do that. The question is preposterous. I don't think the power to return him to the United States. I don't have the power to return him to the United States. That was quite, going back to Mark's comment, I think it was Mark, who said, it's so nice to see this transparency, get to witness this meeting and have so many people in that room that could relay the president's thinking. And Marco Rubio also hitting it out of the park, saying the foreign policy of the United States is conducted by the President of the United States, not by a court. And that is something the Trump administration, I believe, you've heard me say this on the program from day one of the second term, I think he was prepared for this. I think that's what the 4 years of him not being in office were really all about, were preparation. Not what they were really all about, but what he spent his time doing, preparation for these types of instances, being prepared when activist judges try to stop his agenda, when bureaucrats try to work behind the scenes to throw a monkey wrench into his agenda. He was prepared for these type of things, and it is fascinating to watch. Also, watching him go after Caitlin Collins yesterday. We'll talk about that as well. We're going to tell you a little bit more about what the media is saying about the El Salvadorian president visiting the Oval Office when we come back. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Frankly Speaking Roof Cam, brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. We are back broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. Thank you so much for joining us on this tax day edition of Frankly Speaking. Comment from a viewer. I love this. They say good morning, and they say, I realize it's a local issue. I do not mind. I love change up the topic. We're going to go back to the El Salvador president's visit, But I think you raise a very good point here. The viewer says, "Good morning, Frank. I realize this is a local issue and not a national issue, but I think it's something that citizens of Corning should be aware of. Recently, as we all know, the city of Elmira enacted a law banning public encampments. Unfortunately, the city of Corning has not followed suit. I mention this because for those who are unaware, there is a homeless encampment just south of the highway overpass near Reynolds Ave. A concerned citizen of Corning contacted City Hall to ensure the city is aware of this situation, only to be informed that they are aware of this situation, but that it is on state land, not city property, so they cannot and will not do anything about it. I guess the fact that this is only approximately a quarter of a mile from Winfield Street School does not matter. Regardless of who is responsible for the property in question, doesn't the city and state communicate?" Great point. I think Corning should take the lead and copy what the city of Elmira thought an important enough issue to address. And thank you for that. And you're exactly right. They should be proactive on this. I would argue at this point it's not even really proactive. But it is becoming a major issue. You see it here even on Market Street with the issues of people that are clearly homeless. And I think it's only going to get worse. And as you mentioned, the scary fact that it's a quarter of a mile from the Winfield Street School. So thank you for that. Never feel bad about changing the topic. I love it. Okay, so Trump repeatedly insulted CNN's Caitlin Collins in the Oval Office, like repeatedly. Trump called her a low-rated anchor and slammed CNN's credibility as he took questions alongside the El Salvador president. Collins wanted answers about the deportation, of course, of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a Maryland man who, you know the whole story. We've been talking about it, who was removed to the Center for Terrorism Confinement. Okay. When Collins first prodded Trump about the issue, he pointed to CNN's less than stellar ratings before passing the baton off to Pam Bondi to defend the deportation and subsequent actions. Then Trump tapped Homeland Security Advisor Stephen Miller to speak up while taking another shot at Collins' employer. Can you also respond to that question? Because, you know, it's asked by CNN, and they always ask it with a slant because they're totally slanted because they don't know what's happening. That's why nobody's watching them. Miller, also Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy, argued Garcia is an El Salvador native. You know that. I mentioned it in the last segment. He called it arrogant for media members to expect the U.S. to tell El Salvador how to handle its own citizens. But then, an undeterred Collins continued to pepper Trump about Garcia, but Trump wasn't having it yesterday. Yesterday was not Collins' day. How long do you have to answer this question? How long do we have to answer this question? Why don't you just say, isn't it wonderful that we're keeping criminals out of the country? Why can't you just say that? Why do you go over and over? And that's why nobody watches you anymore. You have no credibility. Yeah, they would never present anything in a positive way. Of course, they never let it drop. They're hoping someone will make a mistake, make an error, slip up in what they said so that it can make another week-long story out of it. Jake Tapper, also at CNN, that according to Trump has no credibility, was talking about Garcia's case. He said, just a quick fact check on some of this and some important background on Garcia, who is married to a U.S. citizen. He has one child with her and 2 stepchildren. It is true that Garcia is a citizen of El Salvador, and it is true that he entered the United States illegally sometime around 2011. His attorney says that he was initially fleeing gang violence in El Salvador. As for the allegation that he's a member of MS-13, which he fervently denies, well, the evidence on that is much more flimsy. According to court documents, Garcia and 3 other men were arrested in 2019. He was asked if he was a gang member. He said no. Keep up the good work, Jake Tapper. Garcia has been deemed a gang member by the Prince George's County Police Department, in part because he was at the time wearing a Chicago Bulls hat and a hoodie. And a confidential informant claimed that Garcia was an active member of MS-13, although he denied that at the time. So he's getting arrested, and they ask him if he's a gang member, and he said no. And I guess we're supposed to take that as gospel. Thank you, Jake Tapper. Also, Jake Tapper admitting from the jump that he is a citizen of El Salvador and he came here illegally. So, doesn't that prove the point that not only Marco Rubio, Pam Bondi, Stephen Miller, Trump all made during the Oval Office meeting yesterday? This speaks to what Trump has said about losing credibility and doing everything with a slant. But I'll continue with what Jake Tapper had to say. Now, later that year, an immigration judge granted Garcia protective status, allowing him to stay in the United States legally, finding that even though Garcia was liable for deportation because he was in the country illegally, he should be protected from deportation, the judge said, to El Salvador because that would constitute a danger to him. Here we are 6 years later, despite that protective order and despite 0 criminal convictions, Garcia is now back in El Salvador, and not just El Salvador, but in a notorious prison there. And while Trump officials claim and admit, rather, that it was an oversight that he was deported to begin with, they're still clinging to this rather shoddy claim that he is, without question, an MS-13 member. And they're doing that to justify the fact that he's sitting in a prison in El Salvador. Yeah, I think most people probably have more of an issue of him being deported to a notorious prison than they have an issue with him being deported in general. But Trump is also suggesting he would like to send so-called homegrown violent criminals, American citizens, to prison in El Salvador. So as it was said yesterday in the Oval Office, we sent an El Salvadorian citizen back to El Salvador. We can't demand that they give him now back to us. And it's like the president of El Salvador said, I'm not going to smuggle a terrorist into the United States. I mean, you can see from Jake Tapper, and it's why, to Trump's point, that they have lost a lot of credibility. He admits right from the jump that he came here illegally and that he is an El Salvador citizen. End of story. It fits exactly what Trump was saying. So they're always on the side of fighting to keep, in this case, alleged gang members on American soil. Chuck Schumer said not getting this person back, this El Salvador resident back, pure nonsense. When asked by reporters, and this is to Chuck Schumer, let me take a step back. Schumer heaped criticism on those remarks. And the remarks were when Bukele said, of course I'm not going to do that. They don't give the best part of that quote, the Hill, this is the Hill, far left Hill. They don't give the best part of that quote, which is when he said, I'm not going to smuggle a terrorist back in the United States. But Schumer said, President Bukele's comments today is pure nonsense. The law is clear. Due process was grossly violated. And the Supreme Court has clearly spoken that the Trump administration must facilitate and effectuate the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. He should be returned to the U.S. immediately. Due process and the rule of law are cornerstones of American society for citizens and non-citizens alike, and not to follow that is dangerous and outrageous. A threat to one is a threat to all. Just like when you talk about Harvard not giving in to Trump's demands, so effectively saying we are standing with these anti-Semitic protests. In this case, do you want to be Chuck Schumer? Or do you want to be the Democrat Party who says we are against deporting criminals? We want those criminals back on American soil, or it's some type of threat to democracy? This is how the Hill doesn't want to give you the full story. This is what the Hill says. Quote, they're quoting the El Salvador president right now. How can I return him to the United States? I smuggle him to the United States? Of course I'm not going to do it. The question is preposterous, Bukele said, labeling Abrego Garcia a terrorist. Yeah, he said that earlier in the quote. They omitted that from the quote. But then he said, I don't have the power to return him to the United States. I'm not releasing. I mean, we're not very fond of releasing terrorists into our country, he added. So again, not even quoting him right, but you see what the Hill has to do and some of these other far left outlets to try to paint this in a way that the American people don't seem shocked that the Democrat Party is fighting for this person. Senator Chris Van Hollen said Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia never should have been abducted and illegally deported, and the courts have made clear the administration must bring him home now. However, since the Trump administration appears to be ignoring these court mandates, we need to take additional action. That's why I've requested to meet with President Bukele during his trip to the United States, and if Kilmar is not home by midweek, I plan to travel to El Salvador this week to check on his condition and discuss his release. Now the cavalry's coming in. Chris Van Hollen from Maryland. Okay. A little bit more about this when we come back. I do want to talk about the New York State budget, too, because there's a lot coming. Well, not really a lot coming out, but a couple updates that I think are necessary. Keep your comments, keep your waves coming in. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam, brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. We are back broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street Corning. A couple of comments from viewers. You keep saying that the leftist media has lost credibility. You need to back it up with specifics. In other words, I refuse to watch the fake news and welcome its demise, but I'm not aware of any facts other than the supposed ratings have dropped. Well, I'm not exactly sure what you're looking for when you say facts. I think as I was reading a story that was completely, clearly biased in a way to attack Trump, that was the fact I was giving you. But I mean, we've listed them on this program, and just a small amount, just as of recently, like we talked about earlier in the program, the 60 Minutes deceptive edit of Kamala Harris's interview, or when there was the debate where you had the moderators say specifically that they had practiced fact-checking Trump but not Harris, because they knew that they were only going to be quote-unquote fact-checking Trump and attacking Trump. You watch the Sunday shows and the bias that is spewing. Now, if you're looking for like some type of polling number, if you recall, and I don't have the exact specific numbers in front of me, but the media polled lower than Congress, which is saying something very loud and very clear about their loss of credibility. So when they are actually polling, have less favorability, the media, than Congress, which is historically always low, that I think signals their loss of credibility. So the story that I was reading and why I mentioned that specifically was because of the bias in that piece by Jake Tapper. We can give you plenty more examples, or there's just recent ones during the presidential race of bias and lack of credibility as of recently. Tons more examples. Or if you're someone more that trusts the polls, the American people have a more unfavorable opinion of the media than Congress. So those are, I'm not going to do that every time I talk about them losing their credibility, but if that's what you are specifically looking for, and if it's not, please reach out. Let me know how I can back it up even more, how I can back up with specifics. Okay. Comment from a different viewer. Tax day. Yes, it is. Happy tax day. But been there, done that for 64 years. Also, for the past 30 years, I sent a very modest check to the New York Treasury and U.S. Treasury to be applied toward my share of our debt, which I believe to be approximately $11,000 for the state and $100,000 plus for the Fed. But, you knew there would be a but, I just received a notice from the New York State Department of Motor Vehicles for license renewal. Since I have veterans plates, it is a modest $150. When someone says thank you for your service, I reply an honest, it was my privilege to have served. But, again, a but, I see a neon sign on their forehead flashing $150. For all politicians who are paid for their service, I say for my fellow veterans who can't afford $150, shame on you. Thank you. That's yes, $150 for that. I couldn't agree more. That is something that should be looked into. That is something that should, $150 just to have the veterans license plate. Well, your license renewal, the veterans plates. Yeah, that is unacceptable. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. We'll have to bring that up with some of our guests on the program. We're a little light on guests this week because it is spring break for many. So I didn't want to have less of an audience or a different audience. I wanted to make sure our guests got the full attention. So thank you for that. I did not realize $150. Shame on them. Absolutely. So we were talking about El Salvador's president visiting. Stephen Collinson says, as he lionizes a strong man, Trump flexes power over the law, top colleges, and the media. The administration is projecting presidential authority in a broader and more overt way than any modern White House. Its expansive interpretation of statutes and questionable interpretations of judges' rulings is causing alarm about its impact on the rule of law, freedom of expression, and the Constitution. Trump saying there's something broken, the liberal establishment, but they're not running things anymore in this country. He sat beside President Bukele of El Salvador, who brands himself as the world's coolest dictator and whose huge popularity is based on a brand of elected authoritarianism Trump admires. The warmth lavished on a leader who's been treated as a pariah by a conventional U.S. administration was an ominous window into the 47th president's future intentions. Boukiel has suspended parts of their constitution and imprisoned tens of thousands of people without due process in a crackdown against crime. He suggested Trump might try something similar. Quote, Mr. President, you have 350 million people to liberate, but to liberate 350 million people, you have to imprison some. That's the way it works, right? Trump's own hardline aspirations were revealed in the meeting through the prism of his increasingly ruthless deportation policy, which is raising profound questions about apparent abuses of due process and human rights. This is no surprise coming from Stephen Collinson. This is just a whole story alluding to, suggesting that Trump is a strong man or wants to be a strong man. We've heard this from the first term as well. Lawrence Tribe, a renowned constitutional scholar, told CNN's Monday that the administration's defiance made it likely the case would end up back before the Supreme Court, which would then face a fateful choice. Quote, it's not just immigrants who are subject to this kind of game. It is a deadly game that could be played with any citizen. The president has already begun to play it. That is not the country that any of us, I think, grew up in. Now, it's interesting that you preface it by saying that Lawrence Tribe, who is biased, is a renowned constitutional scholar. But indeed, Trump is mulling an even more flagrant challenge to the law. He suggested that his scheme to deport those who he says are gang members and terrorists to a harsh El Salvadorian prison could be widened. So this is Stephen Collinson at CNN. Seems to be a lot of talk about CNN today, attempting to paint Trump as a strong man because he going after colleges. Now, keep in mind, these colleges, specifically like Harvard, have a right to allow these type of anti-Semitic protests on their college campuses. They do. You have a constitutional right to protest. You don't have a constitutional right to attack Jewish students or to destroy buildings and property. There's also some trespassing issues on universities, but that's neither here nor there. But there are consequences. So just like if you're caught at a protest in your office, let's say, and you're wearing something on your shirt or your hat that it shows support for a candidate, and your employer doesn't like that, doesn't like it being political in the office, you can be fired. There's consequences for these things. So to suggest that Harvard still deserves $5 billion when they won't stand up and support their Jewish students, I think is wrong-headed to be on that side of the argument. You need to support your Jewish students. You need to squash this anti-Semitism. And if you don't, that's fine. That's your prerogative. But you're not going to receive $5 billion in taxpayer funding either. And that's what Stephen Collinson went to next. Elite law and education are in Trump's sights. And then mammoth political and legal battles are beginning. The administration's response shows it's doing nothing to bring back Garcia. It's beginning to look like yet another attempt to evade the authority of the judiciary. On this and many other fronts, the sense of a coming constitutional collision is growing impossible to ignore, says Stephen Collinson. It is interesting when it comes to the judges. As Marco Rubio said yesterday in that meeting that we've been talking about all morning long, that it's not up to the judges to make the foreign policy decisions. It's the president's decision. But you're seeing very much, and I know that was a Trump appointee judge, but you're seeing a lot of judicial activism, let's say. There was even one, what was it, that came out yesterday, I think it was, maybe it was 2 days ago now, yesterday. Judge blocked Trump from revoking legal status for 530,000 migrants who flew into the U.S. via Biden's program. A federal judge blocked the Trump administration yesterday, the migrants from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. Those migrants who flew here during Joe Biden's presidency. The migrants came to the U.S. under Biden's controversial CHNV mass humanitarian parole program. In the order, Judge Talawani, an Obama appointee, wrote that each migrant needs to have an individual case-by-case review. Biden created the CHNV program in 2023 via the Executive Parole Authority. The program was launched in 2022 and initially first applied to Venezuelans before it was expanded to additional countries. So, again, just to show you more about this activist judge judging or the activist judicial judge blocks Trump from revoking the legal status for 530,000 plus migrants who flew into the U.S. via Biden's policy. All right, we got to take a short break. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. We will be right back. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam, brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. Welcome back as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio on Market Street in Corning. A lot of comments coming in. One person asked, and I haven't received this from anybody else, but I'd be curious. It says, just curious, any viewers are having reception issues this morning, or is it on my end possibly? You are freezing up intermittently. Thanks. I have not heard that, but if anybody else has found that to be the case, please let me know, and we'll take a look into that. So I'd love to hear one way or the other, good, bad, thumbs up or thumbs down. You can even do it that simple. Comment from a different viewer. If this dude that got accidentally deported is such a great person, bring him back and deposit him at Chuck Schumer's house. He can stay there. Thank you very much for that. This one was sent in by a voicemail, and I appreciate when people leave voicemails, but what it does, just so you know, it translates it for me because I can't listen to it while we're live on the air. So it's interesting. This is not a knock on it at all, but sometimes the translation gets a little wonky. So I apologize if I'm not reading your comment exactly as it was intended. But hi, Frank, I'm watching your show every day listener. Well, thank you for watching. I appreciate that, and we're going to count you as a wave. Everyone's making a stink about this El Salvador illegal that was sent back to his country of origin and wants him brought back to the United States. What about all the American citizens that are being held captive and have been for years in Russia and Turkey and China? And they don't care about those people, but they want to bring back this guy. Go figure. Thank you very much. All right. Just a comment. Okay, well, that's what we were looking for. Just a comment. The Jewish students who are being discriminated against by essentially the left-wing Democrats should take Harvard to court under civil rights laws. That's a very good point. Thank you very much. All right, we're saying all good here from a lot of people. So maybe an issue with your television. It could also depend on how you are receiving the broadcast, whether it's cable, whether it's antenna. But most people giving me a thumbs up. I don't see any to the contrary. Oh, this person's saying I think it might be on their end, possibly if they're on an antenna. Good point. Thank you. Okay. Do I have time? Let's go to, do you mind if we go to the New York State budget just real quickly, and then we'll get to the Democrat Party and then to some more issues with Trump. The New York updates are very quick. Governor Hochul says New Yorkers don't care about a late budget. I have yet to be asked by a regular New Yorker who's not a member of the press corps why the budget is taking so long. They don't care. She's probably not wrong. I mean, I know that people want to see actual reforms done. The reforms she's trying to push through when it comes to public safety, they're not strong enough, but they're something. She said, they want to know, are you working on that affordability plan to put money back in my pocket when I'm sitting here so anxious because my 401k plan is going to heck, we'll say? There's a lot of stress out there. And I'll tell you, one of the stressors on everyday New Yorkers is not the date that it's going to be done. Okay. Now, City and State NY is saying that the state budget is unlikely to be finished before the end of the month. Albany insiders think the state budget might drag into May as legislative leaders appear incapable of coming to a meaningful compromise. Now, we know recently Governor Hochul said, hey, it's nice here in the summer in Albany. So she is in absolutely no hurry. There are few deadlines, legal and spiritual, that Hochul has to contend with as she holds firm on her budget goals. The first was April 1st, of course, that date that the state is supposed to have a budget in place, though it's more of a suggestion than an actual deadline at this point. Hochul and the legislature easily blew past that date. The next was Passover on April 12th, which normally marks the start of a 2-week holiday. But without an on-time budget, they'll now be back in Albany this week, passing temporary extenders for a few more weeks. At this point, the only people truly aware of the lack of progress are Albany politicos and state lawmakers who had to cancel a spring getaway. If there isn't a budget in place by May 20th, though, it will impact school boards in New York and the communities they serve, which will need to vote on their own budgets by then. Without a firm answer on foundation aid, the main mechanism to fund state public schools, districts will be in a sticky position, and be prepared for that to be used not used, but to be brought up when it comes budget season. We know that some of the local budgets are looking very costly to taxpayers. So prepare one of the excuses being to be prepared for one of the excuses being that Albany hasn't released a budget yet, and it's not necessarily a wrong excuse, but it could be an excuse to add a little more money in that budget. According to legislative leaders like Carl Hastie, substantive work on the fiscal section of the state budget has taken a backseat to policy debate. Of course, we know Carl Hastie was saying, could we get paid? Can we do a bill that, lawmakers in Albany get paid even though we couldn't get a budget on time? Which goes to show you how in your face they are. They don't even care anymore how they look, how it looks, that they are willing to say, yeah, we'll get paid for not doing our job. Why not? All right. So there is your New York State updates before we take a break. It does look like everyone seems to be having no problem with the broadcast. I'm on antenna and I've had no issues with the reception. So there you are, viewer. Thanks for sending it in, though. We do have a couple updates on the Democrat Party that we're going to get to here in just a moment. Then we'll talk about Trump. We had, oh boy, I know I have so many things I want to get to, and I can already see by the time we might not get to all of that. But I would love to hear your thoughts on the El Salvador president, his visit, what was said in that press meeting in the Oval Office, and your thoughts about Garcia's case. It does not seem like, well, as the El Salvador president said, I'm not going to smuggle in a terrorist to the United States. He's staying in El Salvador. But Chris Van Hollen saying, I'm going to go over there and visit them. That's enough to scare the president of El Salvador. But let's take a break before I run too long on a tangent. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. We are back broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio on Marcus Street in Corning. This is an update from a story that we had quite some time ago, or that maybe you could say has been brewing for quite some time. You have the leadership in the Democrat Party being questioned, whether it's Hakeem Jeffries, whether it's Chuck Schumer, and now Governor Whitmer, that they're being questioned for not doing enough. The resistance movement, as it's known, that's all they want, is resistance to Trump's agenda. And if that comes in the form of Cory Booker giving a 25-hour, 5-minute speech, not having accomplished anything, but at least talking for that long, they're happy with even that low of a bar of resistance. Then the criticism started to come out for Nancy Pelosi. Now, Pelosi hasn't received quite as much heat because she's been at the forefront of, like, for instance, calling out Chuck Schumer when he agreed to the vote on the continuing resolution. So they haven't been as critical of her. But now, according to the Post, Nancy Pelosi is adamant she won't release her grip on the Democrat Party despite the resounding defeat in 2024 and a growing chorus urging her to step down. But Nancy Pelosi has a history of this. Even at times when Democrats lost the House, when she was Speaker of the House, she didn't give up her power, even when it was landslide and they took devastating defeats. She did not give up her leadership position, and then she would be back a few years later into the spot of Speaker of the House. Ex-President Joe Biden named Pelosi as one of the chief architects of the move to push him aside for Kamala Harris. And she liked taking that credit. Remember the kind of the Godfather attitude of I did what I had to do. But then when people got critical that why wasn't it done earlier, why was Harris chosen, why wasn't there some sort of primary, she deflected and blamed it on Biden for not getting out earlier. She's a master at this, of kind of the dirty politics. She was instrumental in the disastrous $1 billion campaign, closer to $1.5 to $2 billion of Kamala Harris, leading the party to lose the White House, Senate, and House of Representatives. Now there are younger members of the party and even current House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries who believe it's time for a refresh and new leadership. This is according to inside sources. But Pelosi insists on business as usual. She is not going to give up this power. You can say it's for financial reasons. You can say it's for just political reasons. She is not going to go down without a fight. Now, Hakeem Jeffries, I'm sure, would love to have her out of a leadership position because she's always kind of breathing on his neck. She had that job for so long that she doesn't want to give it up. As long as Nancy takes a breath, she is going to do what she wants to do, said Willie Brown, the former mayor of San Francisco, who once dated Vice President Harris, if you recall. She's the heart and soul of the Democrat Party, particularly for Californians, he added. Now, behind the scenes, some see it differently. According to one Democrat, former New York City lawmaker, complaining that Pelosi still meddles in national affairs. Hakeem wants her out. Nancy has her hand in every decision he makes as a leader. She just can't help herself. She was critical of Schumer. When Schumer went on that continuing resolution, she really much liked the power of having the power to bring down Biden. A spokesman for Hakeem Jeffries said in a statement, Leader Jeffries has repeatedly and publicly made clear that he and House Democrats are proud to stand on the historic shoulders of Nancy Pelosi. Now, despite having just turned 85, the former speaker, or as she calls herself, Speaker Emerita, is that how you say that? Has already filed paperwork in November to run for Congress in 2026. So you're looking at 86 years old, she'll be running for re-election to Congress. And she has nearly $10 million in her campaign coffers, according to the Federal Election Commission. With a personal net worth estimated at $250 million and 20 terms as a congresswoman, younger members of the party feel Pelosi has become the very embodiment of the well-heeled corporate Democrat, an image they are desperate to shake. And that's why you've seen calls for people like, and now this isn't for running against Nancy Pelosi, obviously, because she's a New Yorker, but people like AOC, younger people being put in leadership positions in the Democrat Party, not kind of coming off the heels of Biden's disastrous reelection campaign and the real serious talks about age. The talks are now starting to hit Nancy Pelosi. I really feel like the Democrats actually need to become a party that's fighting tooth and nail for the working class and middle class right now, said one of her opponents in the 2026 Democrat primary. Chakrabarty, the last name, explained how after the 2024 election, he was expecting changes. Instead, he listened to Pelosi tell a New York Times podcaster everything would be status quo. She basically made the case for how the Democrats don't really need to change. You know, that they ran a great race, did their best, and nothing needs to change. That was the first warning sign to me. And yes, after those landslide losses, many people thought there would be some changes or some soul searching. We were hesitant to think so on this program, but we wondered if there would be soul searching. At the end of the day, it looks as if there was not. So again, upset some of the younger people in the Democrat Party that Nancy Pelosi wants to keep it status quo, do it as it's always been done in Washington. We'll see where that comes. Now, we got to take a break. We're going to get to a few things on Trump's administration, and then we will wrap things up. Get your last minute questions in so I can read them before the end of the broadcast. Love to hear from you as we call it a day. Just about a few minutes left of Frankly Speaking. So stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV, Big Fox. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. We are back broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. Wrapping up today's edition, let's go to some viewer comments. So shouldn't the attacks on Tesla dealerships be a hate crime? Do these people realize they are only harming the local people and dealers, not Elon? That is a very good point. That is hurting the local guys. That's why in Colony, New York, we were talking about it, where they want to stop a dealership from going in there, and a missed opportunity for jobs, missed opportunity for the residents. Mark writes in, I hope the Democrat Party stays on their same old agenda, and the Republicans will win again. Thanks, Mark. Comment from a different viewer. What part of illegal needs to be explained? Coming to our country in this manner, you are already breaking our laws. Why would we expect you to obey others? Why are illegals given taxpayer money without our consent when so many U.S. citizens go without? Yes, there was a report out, too, that government bureaucrats tried to stop the Trump administration from canceling illegal alien Social Security benefits. You remember when that was a major story making the rounds. Well, more than a dozen current and former Social Security Administration officials leaked various information regarding this issue to the Washington Post, seemingly in an attempt to sow outrage among Americans over Trump's cancellation of Social Security numbers for more than 6,300 illegal aliens. While the Trump administration probed how to revoke Social Security benefits for illegal aliens, a number of bureaucrats inside the Social Security Administration pushed back on the plan, including one such technology expert who was removed. And that should come as no surprise. Remember, Politico, after Trump had won, but before he had been sworn in, they said, hey, nameless, faceless bureaucrats work behind the scenes to stop Trump's agenda. No one else is there that can do it. We need the bureaucrats, the unelected bureaucrats, to do it. So that should come as no surprise. Last comment for this morning. Ken writes in, the Democrats know that they have limited paths back to power, and they know that they have to use and protect those paths continuously during the next 3.5 years if they have any hope in getting back into the White House. Number one, demonize the Republicans on every issue. 2, work tirelessly on keeping the illegal immigrants in the country and get them voting. 3, cause general chaos and blame the Trump administration for it. 4, keep the electorate divided on race, gender, religion, country of origin, and anything else they can think of. 5, keep Trump's agenda from making the country better by endless litigation. And 6, utilize the legacy media to lie and propagandize the sheeple on Republicans being bad and Democrats being good. The sad reality is that most likely these tactics will work for them in the 2028 presidential election, especially given the fact that there isn't another Donald Trump standing in the wings to energize the electorate to vote Republican in 2028. Thank you, Ken. That's why we need, I think someone like J.D. Vance can energize the base in a very different way than Trump. No one's ever going to be Trump. You can't out-Trump Trump. There's just no one that's going to be that. But if you see these policies working and you see a more traditional politician, if you will, pushing this agenda, I think there could be some excitement there if everything goes as planned in the Trump administration. Things are good. Okay, well, that does it. I can't believe it. This program went very quickly. Thank you to everybody who joined us. Kind of piggybacking off a couple of those comments, according to Newsweek, they say that Elon Musk could be Democrats' secret weapon in the 2026 midterms. They believe that he is going to be so unpopular, or is so unpopular, that is going to drive people out to the Democrat Party come the midterm elections in 2026. Oh, I didn't get a chance to bring up Holy Week. Trump announced his plans for an extraordinary celebration for Holy Week. We'll talk about that on tomorrow's program. I know we had a viewer send in that proclamation. I apologize that I didn't have a chance to read that. We'll talk a little bit about it tomorrow. And to end on an amazing note, NVIDIA intends to build, test, and package up to $500 billion worth of AI devices in the United States over the next 4 years. Fully domestic production of its current generation of chips has begun at a plant in Arizona. Production will also ramp up over the next year or so at plants in Texas, as they're calling it the Trump effect in action. Now it does it for today's edition of Frankly Speaking. Thank you for all the comments. Thank you for all the waves. We appreciate you being a part of the broadcast this morning. I ask you to tune in every weekday morning starting at 6 a.m. for Frankly Speaking only on WYDC TV Big Fox. We will see you tomorrow morning bright and early. I look forward to it already.